Good morning. We are in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer discourse on page 415, which is the foundational text or the source text of a big part of the end of Hemshech Chaim Beis. And we're learning this because, firstly, getting the background material is always good to help understand the ideas, but most importantly, is because Hemshech Chaim Beis, the Rebbe Rashab never concluded. He didn't finish, and we see that from some of the questions he asks and some of the themes he begins to discuss and never really finishes. However, by learning this Maimer, we can reconstruct what may have been said because this Maimer continues and is clearly the base, as I said, the source text. So learning this, we see where the ideas would have flowed. We just don't know everything the Rebbe Rashab would have perhaps added or emphasized, but we definitely can come away with a pretty clear picture. And that's what we've been learning. So I've been intermittently, I guess, from time to time, frequently trying to create those connections. And briefly, the Rebbe Rashab concludes with the idea of the contemplation during Shema, when we contemplate on the divine unity, which ultimately is what gives the power to the divine soul to influence and inspire the animal soul to also love God, even though naturally and initially the animal soul has other interests. But then the Maimer continues, as the Rebbe Rashab also alludes to earlier, in the fact that in addition to the fact that the soul is compared to a flame, to a candle, and that candle includes the divine soul like the wick, which draws and transforms the oil of the animal soul into fuel to create the divine fiery love, there's also the verse, Ner mitzvah Torah Ohr, that a mitzvah is compared to a candle. And we learned that at length the previous pages. There, the Rebbe Rashab, even though he speaks about it earlier, he doesn't really bring it back to that theme. And then Torah Ohr, which is what we're in the middle of now. That in addition to Ner Mitzvah, that mitzvah is also part of the process where we perform and we are able to draw down God's will into the physical existence and transform the material world into the divine will aligned with what God wants this world to look like. So Torah Ohr is the light, Torah, the light. This is a reflection of, an expression of the divine essence itself. Because the Ohr is what he calls the Ohr Atzmi, that precedes the Tzimtzum, that precedes all the concealments. Essentially the source code being given to us into existence to be able to transform existence. We shall learn how the Torah is the source for the mitzvahs. But right now, Torah Ohr. In Torah Ohr, there's two dimensions. There's the written Torah, and there's the oral, and the Torah Shabbat Peh, the oral Torah. With the difference being Chachmi Lo Chachmi Tato, that the written Torah comes to us from a top down, like a direct light, and the oral Torah is also given to us, but it is developed through human effort, through our study, through our understanding, through our struggling with and straining ourselves to be able to create the birur, the clarity necessary to figure out how to apply the written Torah, which is in more brief terms, like he said, and we'll discuss in a moment. The difference between the two is more like the blueprint, the written Torah. And the oral Torah is turning it into a working document that becomes something you can implement in details. And therefore, the oral Torah in that sense has something that the written Torah doesn't even have, which is it leads us back to the original source, because the whole purpose of the Torah was to transform the world. And the oral Torah is necessary to do so. Because that's why the scholars, the sages of the oral Torah are called Boinei Olam. They're the builders. That they are the ones that build the world. And he asked, didn't God build the world with the written Torah? He said, that's true as well. But that is more from the top down. Like he said, that is in the general, initially how it was created. But the sustenance of it, Kima Elamis, That's through the sages and the scholars and all of us studying Torah and developing it and applying it, as we learned. And there, Noz Tchilosim B'Seif, and the beginning is wedged in the end, or Seif Maisa B'Machshava Tchila, because the end process is what the initial intention was. In other words, the initial intention was not just that should be a Torah that illuminates what God wants, a Torah that is reflecting the divine light before the tzimtzum, is that the Torah should be implemented and executed in real time in this world. And that's the ultimate goal, the transformation of darkness into light, which is what happens in Shas, the 6 orders of Shas that enter and immerse themselves into the details of this world, including what is right and what is wrong, and what is kosher, what is not kosher, and what is pure, what's not pure. And that is the birur that we are doing in this world, and that reaches even deeper than the written Torah, which is the Yosha that comes down from the top down. Now, keep in mind, the oral Torah is an explanation of the written Torah, so it's not like competition here. It's not like 2 different energies. It's just that the oral Torah fulfills the ultimate purpose of the written Torah. That's really the way to understand it. Okay, now the end of the paragraph, which we learned in the last class that we learned, as I said, was a little, at least when I read it, seemed to be a little confusing. So I went over it again, and I want to sum up what my findings are, so then we can tie up the knot, so to speak, of what we learned, and then continue on. So I'm looking at the bottom page, the second half of the page, 415. So he said, Al-Kain, he said like this. Yeah. I have to explain the oral Torah's function. Al-Kain b'birze amar l'chvedi barasav yitzartiv, and that's why we say l'chvedi, that the covet, the honor of God, which is the same gematria, the same numerical equivalent of 32. So this is referring to the 32 paths of wisdom, but the wisdom of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Because where do you fulfill, so to speak, God's honor in the highest levels is not just the written Torah, it's as it comes down into Chachma of Malchus of Torah Sheba'al Peh Dafka. Which is why Mishnah is called like Malchus. Malchus is covered. The kingship, the dignity, the majesty. The majesty is experienced as you bring the Torah down and implement it. Think of it this way. Here's a simple physical example. A king who has an empire, and he's passed certain laws, edicts that he's passed on through his ministers to share with his people, his subjects. Laws of the land. And until those laws are not interpreted and applied, in actuality, as much as he's passed on he's shared what he wants, it's been written into law. So you have like now the new constitution of this king and this empire, so and so. That's the written part. But now comes the next step, is to interpret it and understand it, that people can actually apply it. So where's the cover, the majesty of the king most experienced? Not just when he writes it. Of course he has the authority to write it, and the law has been passed. It's now a new legal requirement, whatever the laws are. But where does it really play itself out, that you could say is when the job is done, is when the people receive it, understand it, interpret it, and apply it. That's what Torah Sheba'al Peh does. So Torah Shebiksav is the king giving us all his instructions. Like we said before, it's like he writes it all out. The blueprint is there. Everything that you need to build is there. But the thing is, you haven't built. And that's where the scholars, the sages who interpret that law and discuss it in all the nuances and detail that Torah Sheba'al Peh does, that's where it comes alive. And that's the covered, l'kvedi, barasav yitzativ afasisiv. So essentially, it's when you come and bring it down all the way into Asiyah that creates the l'kvedi of covered. So it's that malchus of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now, the last section I'm going to read now again, because we read it but a little quickly, and as I said, it wasn't so clear. I'm going to read from the line, U'kamoshe kosav beitz chaim. This is like a little more than halfway down the page, 415. If you're following the text, it's at ayinbeis.com. So he says like this, U'kamoshe kosav beitz chaim, which he cited earlier. I just want to find it earlier. Yeah. on page 411, if we come on with this, just 1 second, please. Okay. So it says in AdHamtz like this: Talmud is in Bria, Mishnah is in Yetzirah, and Mikra is in Asiyah. Which means the 3 sections of Torah that we know. The first 2 are actually Torah Sheba'al Peh, and the last one is Torah Shebiksav. So Talmud is in Bria, which is usually associated with understanding Chabad. Mishnah is the Midas, is in Yetzirah, and Mikra is in Asiyah. We learned this in Ayin Beis at length. Why is that the case? Seemingly Mikra should be higher than the highest one. Because Mikra, when we learn Pasuk, we only learn it's all in narrative form. It's all about the action. So here's the key thing to remember. It's Torah Sheba'al Peh that helps us define the written Torah in a way to make it actionable. But Torah Shebiksav is actually written in a very actionable way, even though you can't interpret it without Talmud. And that's the paradox that we were addressing here. So Talmud is necessary to implement the Torah Shebiksav, because Torah Shebiksav is too cryptic. But if you read Torah Shebiksav, you'll see there's no long discussions, there's no elaboration, there's no debates, there's no analysis, no evaluation that Torah Sheba'al Peh has. So if you're thinking purely like this, that when you see, let's say, judges or scholars studying and arguing about a theme, that's in Talmud, that's Bria. In Mikra, you don't see that. In the Pasuk, you just see the facts. But on the other hand, the Pasuk is rooted in a far higher place, because the Pasuk is precisely that. What you see is only the outer dimension, which is the narrative. That's what he explained in Ayin Beis. So then that's why there's no contradiction here. Because it depends what you mean by Asiyah. Mikra by Asiyah doesn't mean that Mikra helps you implement it. It means that Mikra lives in the world of Asiyah, because what we get from Mikra is not all its depth. We only get the outer dimension, which is the stories. The stories, the mitzvah, it says that when you come out every 15th of Nisan, you should celebrate Passover. That's an Asiyah statement. That's an action statement. If you want to understand it, you have to go into the Gemara in Talmud and Mishnah, where it explains it in detail. On the other hand, Asiyah is that's what means Asiyah. But the ultimate point is that Mikra is fulfilled only when you are able to spell it out in detail and then actualize it. I think that's going to keep the answer to how he explains now what he's going to say. So let's continue reading. So he says like this: Talmud Bavli. The Gemara says, Machshakim Shivani, in darkness I have Shivani, you've placed me. I dwell in darkness. You've placed me in darkness. That's Talmud Bavli. Why is Talmud Bavli that? Because Talmud Bavli begins from a dark place, a confusing place. You don't have clarity. What is Talmud Bavli doing? It's taking many different verses, analyzing it, evaluating it, arguing and counter-arguing to try to get clarity, to the point of pilpul that transforms darkness to light. Dafke. Kakaz b'tzur, like we learned, it's like striking a flintstone. The flame is not easily accessible. You have to strike it. Striking here is the yigiyah, the exertion of struggling with the different aspects of it, the contradictions and so on, the darkness. You strike it until you draw the flame, the spark. Like the living waters that flow from the liyam to the yama kadmein. I believe we posted already. Yitzchak posted the verse, the chachmila of chachmila. So once you strike the stone, the tzur, you're drawing out these deeper waters that were concealed. Va'afa sisiv zeu mikra. So that's machshaka mishavana Talmud. That's what the Talmud does in Bria to create that clarity. That's the mikra of Teresh B'Ksav, Asiyah. What does he mean by Asiyah here? He means both things. That once you have the Teresh Sheba'al Peh, the mikra becomes alive in this world, but also mikra and Asiyah, because mikra is only the basic facts without all this elaboration, without all this discussion and explanation. B'zeu shekosov l'chvedi barosov. Then that's what it means. That's what it says. L'chvedi, for my honor I've created. What did I create? Odom de bria b'talmud. My honor I created barosov, because for my honor to be, we need to have bria. What's bria Talmud? The Gemara says, she'ein midah gdela himenu. Then when you learn the Torah Shabbat, this is, I'm looking now in Ayin Beis where he explains this particular section. I mentioned it last time. I just want to look inside here. 1 second. What was on page? What page was it on? Give me a moment. I think it was Shin Pei. Yeah, Aleph Shin Pei, 1380. She said like this. The Gemara says that when you learn Pas Mikra, you get a limited amount of information. When you learn Mishnah Midah, Mekablim, the Gemara ain't lo Midah Gdela Mizu. When you learn Gemara, there's no measure greater than it. And that's why, because it's only the Gemara in Talmud where it explains in detail all the details of what the Torah says. So he explained there, and I think this is very important to point out. In time of Moshe Rabbeinu was able to see in a verse in the Torah everything that today we need to spell out in the oral Torah. But when we look in the verse, we only see as I said, the fact. It says, keep Pesach. What does Pesach mean? Moshe Rabbeinu learned with Hashem the whole Torah Shabbat Peh within it. So he saw it there already. That's where Chochmei Allah is shining in its most powerful way. But when you don't have that, the Mikra remains obscure, remains cryptic. It's there. And it comes from this highest level. But you need Torah Shabbat Peh, like he says here, to clarify and to crystallize all the dinim which are concealed. That's Machshaka Meshivani. That's what it means. They're Talmud Bavli. And when you do that, you're actualizing actually what the Mikra Ba'asir is really meant. However, without the oral Torah today, we wouldn't be able to know. That's what he explains there. Briefly, I'm saying, if you want to look it up, you can look it up in 1380 and 1381 in Ayin Beis. So to go back here, so Talmud, there's no greater measure than learning the Gemara. But bitter the er cheser. Why? Because now you're going from the bottom up, which is necessary today. We have to go from the bottom up to try to clarify something that is initially shrouded in darkness. Shemischadish b'pilpul ein shir. That gets mischadish, that's innovated through the pilpul, through the discussion back and forth. Like you see, you can have a wise person can say one cryptic line. He may know what he means. But for us to understand it, we need to struggle with it and work it through. And when you do, mamata lamaila, you're actually achieving something greater because you're going through every possible detail. In that one cryptic line, it's very brief, very summarized. Then shir. But now the Rebbe says, Dafke. This is only when we're talking from the bottom up. That's how it works. That it's the Talmud, the Torah Shabbat Peh, that clarifies and brings the covet, because it is able to interpret exactly all the details as proper.
What does he mean by la'ain shir?
Let me finish the whole thing and explain it.
But you didn't translate la'ain shir.
You asked me last class, and I explained to you that when you study something in detail, it becomes more unlimited when it's only one brief line. Anyway, let me just finish, and then we'll take any questions. 1 second. Achzel b'er chezer dafke. That's dafke in er chezer. When you're going from the bottom up. Sha'am malchus chinas keser kitzmicha she'ela mamata l'mayla. Like I said, I think he means here sha'am malchus is eila chinas keser, meaning malchus, the lowest level, down below, is going upwards through this whole strenuous exertion and this strenuous process. So then it becomes like something that gives growth. Initially, it's only a seed, which is very brief and very detailed. I'm sorry, not detailed, very concise. But when you go mamata l'mayla and you work it through this whole evaluation, it produces, like malchus, like in the earth, it blossoms into an infinite amount of possibilities. Like something growing from mata l'mayla. So initially it all was given to you in a seed, meaning in a concentrated form. That's mamayla mata. But mata l'mayla has created this elaborate thing. That's why you find the Gemara is at length, especially Talmud Bavli, with length. In one pasuk, which is just one line, which is a midah, a measure, in Torah Shabbat comes alive with a full breadth of all different possibilities, as we see till this day. We continue to learn and continue to innovate more details as we develop the idea, mamata l'mayla. That's mamata l'mayla. But if you go through the na'avul bebirur, the Eliyasha, the chachmei law, mamayla mata canal, but when the birur comes from the top down, the Eliyasha, like I said, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, or talking from Hashem, giving it to us. Hashem is giving us Torah Shebiksav. Hashem sees in Torah Shebiksav everything that is included in Torah Shabbat. But that's only Mamayla Lamata. We don't see it. We need to develop it. That's why it's so necessary to have the Torah Shabbat. But it comes from the Mamayla Lamata, Yesh the Chochmel Mamayla Lamata canal, Commission Kosov, L'Kvedi Barosov, Zeu Torah Shebiksav. That's Torah Shebiksav Mamayla Lamata. So then the L'Chvedi Barosov is talking about that from Torah Shebiksav, Afa Sisiv, B'Mishnah B'Talmud, Shabol L'Maisa B'Pel Mamash, Keser Avedim Chatsenim. So when you talk about it that way, then Torah Shebiksav associates more to L'Chvedi Barosov, even though before he said from Eitz Chaim that Mikra is Nasiyah, but that's Mamata L'Mayla. When you talk Mamayla L'Mata, is Torah Shebiksav, and what's Asisiv? What brings it into action? The Mishnah V'Talmud Shabol L'Maisa B'Pel Mamash. That brings it into action, into actionable action. Keser Evonim, like a child. Think of a child as developing. So the initial stage of conception, it's only a seed. But when the child develops, Keser Evonim, so then all the limbs and organs get developed. Chitzenim, the outer limbs and organs. Shenikra Odam Dasiyah. Now we're talking about Odam Dasiyah. Where does Torah Shebiksav become an Odam Dasiyah? It's in Talmud and Mishnah and Talmud. Va'af. And what is the Af Asisiv? When you're talking about Mamayla Lamata, L'Rboisa comes to add Mishum. It's like an additional. What's added? Because Mishum the notes Chalasim B'Seifon. Because the beginning is wedged in the end. So even though Bariya is higher than Asiyah, but the Kavan El Yena, God's intention is when it comes down into action, when we can implement the Torah Shebiksav through Torah Shabbat Dafke, Canal, Medal. So that's how I think I understand it. He's going that Eitz Chaim Ataka says Mikra is Nasiyah. But that is when you're talking Mamata L'Mayla. When you're talking Mamayla Lamata, so Mikra is a higher level, and then it comes down all the way through Mishnah and Talmud into Asiyah. So how is that reconciled? Is that aligned with what he says in Ayin Beis? It sounds to me, yes. I need to look into it a little more, but I just wanted to reread it based on what I think this is the intention of what he wants to say here. Now I'll stop for any questions. Any questions?
Rabbi Jacobson, doesn't this parallel the idea in Ayin Beis that we're talking about the Shabbat meals? Remember that it was an interplay of Malchut being going up to Bina, and then Malchut and Bina being catapulted to Keter. So that was the pathway with different meals of Shabbat.
Not sure. I'd have to think about it. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll think about that. Once we finish, I'll be able to go over it again. Right now, I'm just trying to understand what it says here. Okay. Any other questions? Rabbi Yitzchak, was your question answered?
Essentially, what I understood, La'ain Shir means that the Torah Shabbat Peh, it's a constant unfolding of details I think I even said this the other class. Now that you reminded me to ask before, is that it's Le'ain Shir because you're constantly having to extrapolate additional details and rules based on the innovations of civilization, and how do we apply the Torah to new technologies. I think that's how I was able to wrap it around my head. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's partially correct. No, it's correct, and there's more to it, but that is correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
It's more to it because it also, it basically besides the newer the technologies and so on, the mere fact that you are unpacking Torah B'Ksav into a logical and pilpul really lends itself open now. Once God gave us, in other words, if God given us only the written Torah, you can say it's sealed and that's it. You can't do anything with it. What you have. Once God gave us the methodology of Torah Sheba'al Peh, you technically have infinite possibilities. Because now you know the method, you could always, I'm saying, so in addition to it adapting to new conditions and new situations and new questions, like is a Shabbos elevator usable? Or, can you use certain new flour they create today from whatever, potatoes, etc. But it also has just the ability, Talmud opens up the ability of just an infinite amount of analysis. So.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I can't say that what I explained is absolutely, I'm absolutely convinced. This is the best I can do with what he says here, because it's still unclear to me a few things. But I use also the Ayin Beis, where he reconciles, where it says Mikra is Chabad, and Mishnah is Chagas, and Talmud is Nehi, with what it says in Eitz Chaim, that Talmud is Bria, and Mishnah is Yitzira, and Mikra is Asiya. So I use that to help understand what we just learned here. So actually, Ayin Beis helped me understand what it says, the Mittler Rebbe. Even though the language in the Ayin Beis is not exactly this language, but it definitely is talking about the same topic. Just pointing that out. Okay, good. The bottom line is clear that what he started out was why the Talmidei Chacham are called builders. See, now we understand, because they create that working document that you can really build with and really implement God's will of how to create this world to make it into a home for the divine. Okay. So if there are no other questions, we'll continue. So now, you may be glad to know we're going back to the original theme of Ner Mitzvah and Torah Ohr. Just to give you what we've covered so far in the last pages, Torah Ohr began on page 402. We're now 415. So the last 13 pages have been completely about Torah and Torah Ohr. I mean, here and there he referred to the mitzvah, but now he's going to go back to the original discussion. Remember, the whole Torah Ohr is coming to explain the process of how Neshama transforms this world. And mitzvah and Torah are both additional resources that help us do so. And then he asks the question, why does Ner Mitzvah, Torah Ohr, seem to indicate that a mitzvah doesn't have light without Torah? When a mitzvah is Ratzon Hashem and the 620 pillars of light. And it's also Ratzon Atzmi. So he says, so you can't just answer that Torah is Atzmi and mitzvah is not. He made that very clear on page 409. He says, yeah. That's why we still need to understand the answer. But now he's going to take us back to that original discussion, which, of course, back to Ayin Beis, helps us take it back to the Ayin Beis theme. Because Ayin Beis, that was where it all began. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, Ner Mitzvah and Torah. So I will keep that. I'll keep emphasizing the connection between it all as we come back to the original themes. Because the Mittler Rebbe style, as we know, is Recheves Hanor, the expansive river. Talk about Bli Gvul. This is the Mittler Rebbe style. He can talk about something for 13 pages, just Torah Ohr, which in Alter Rebbe's Maimer is only a few lines that we learned inside. That's what's so fascinating about it. So the new paragraph on the bottom of page 415 is what I'm going to read now. It says, and with all of this that we have learned and discussed, Yuvan b'teisvus beer, we will understand with an additional explanation, Mashakosav kiner mitzvah v'teireh. What we began by discussing, ner mitzvah and teireh, back, as I said, I'm back on page 402. We asked all the questions about it. Yeah. The Ohr Zeh, when we say Torah Ohr, what is this Torah Ohr? So we've learned at length that this Torah Ohr is a Ohr Atzmi. It means it's like the source code of God's original, we'll call it CAT scan of God's mind and Ratzon and God's will. That comes down into this Ishtalshlus without dilution, meaning it's not affected by the Tzimtzum. We still need to learn it and draw it into our lives, into existence, but the Torah itself is intact in that way. That itself breaks into Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh. So he says, the Ohr Zeh, who Ohr the Chochmeh, the Ayin. I'm sorry, no, mistake. This is the Ohr of Chochmeh, the Ein B'chinas Cheshret Tzimtzum Master Klal Lefon of Kishenigla. Not Ayin, my mistake. This is the Chochmeh that defies darkness. That ain't the level of darkness and Tzimtzum does not cover up on it at all when it's revealed. Now that's important because remember the Torah could also remain concealed. So the Torah retains that level of Ohr. But we're talking about when it's revealed, nothing can stop it, so to speak. It pierces darkness, as we learned earlier, because it's coming from a place that's higher than darkness, higher than Tzimtzum. So we just have to go back. Let's just slowly go back there, because the Mittler Rebbe, in his brilliance, can easily just jump back to an idea he spoke about 20 pages ago or 10 pages ago. So let's just recall what he said. He spoke about two types of light, if you remember. A light that comes after darkness. So you have darkness, the Tzimtzum. Then comes the Kav Amidah, that enters the Tzimtzum, and so to speak, like a teacher, spoon feeding, like a laser beam, the students, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, detail by detail, illuminating the darkness. That's absolutely affected by the Tzimtzum, because it is a Kav that is direct. The Tzimtzum is so-called channeling, has impacted it and is allowing it to be able to be channeled to the students. Torah Ohr, he said, there's an Ohr that comes from before the Tzimtzum and is not subject to the Tzimtzum. So it's a Torah that remains always intact with that original source code, as I call it. And if you recall earlier, he said that it comes from a place where cheshech layachshich, higher than dark and light. The darkness altogether is not there, because talking about that type of level of Ohr. However, we need to access it after the Tzimtzum in the Shtalshlus. But that's what Torah is. It's a gift. In other words, had Hashem not given us Torah, God forbid, we would have divine energy in this world. That's called creation. Creative process is created by divine energy, Kav and Mamala Kalaman. But you wouldn't have what is the deeper intention of what God wants us to do with this world. We'd have a world without a Torah, so to speak. And that is, Torah comes and says, let me tell you what the whole purpose of it all. And I'm telling it to you all the way back from the source, all the way original. That's what by Matan Torah was that revelation. Torah Shabbat Peh spells it out, as we learned. But that's what Torah in general is. That's what's called Torah Ohr. That's why he called it Ohr. So he's taking us back now to that level, which really was discussed. I'm going back now quite a while when he spoke about Yeah, I mean, the page is after 402, starting basically 403 and on. So he's taking this back now. He says like this now. The Gam Sha'amar, da fila irtzach uchamhu legabe ilus ilus. So remember, this is a level that is beyond darkness altogether, because it's coming all the way from the Atzmi, like he said. So he says, even when we speak about Keser, remember the expression Keser is what? It's a very refined tzach, a very pure, very clear light. So we learned, however, uchamhu, it's dark, it's black. L'gabei ilus ilus. No, it's Keser. No matter how great a level it is, it's still dark compared to this the cause of causes. A level higher, levels higher than it. Where did we learn that earlier? I believe it was on the bottom of. Because he brought this earlier in this context as well. Trying to find it. It's the bottom of 411. I think on 411, I recall correctly.
I see it on page 381, actually.
That's too early. Anything later?
Anyways, I'll look again. Yeah, later on page, again, 382. And then there's a footnote on 382. And then...
I know that, but not you don't find it earlier, later, huh?
Yeah, I do on 109. Sorry, 409. Sorry, 407.
That's what I was referring to. 409.
I'm sorry, 407. It's about 10 lines from the bottom. Tefila or tzach.
Yeah, I see. So 407. Let me just see something here. 1 second. I just like to see because the flow to see, yeah. Yeah, 407, good. Let me see. Yeah, that's where we took the Torah's ayin, chochmeh, and that's why it's a keli for Ein Sof. Moshe was the Anov, was closer than the. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know if it helps looking there, actually. Okay. So he says like this. When you say Ertzach uchem hu legabe ilus ilus, yeah. Zeu de chochmeh de Bereishis. This is not the Ohr of Torah. This is the Ohr of wisdom that is invested where God uses wisdom to create existence. Yeah, because he's talking to Seder Shtashlus. So Keser is a very high level. It's a pure light, Ertzach, but compared to the source of sources, or the cause of causes, it's Ukum. V'gam zeh, and this level, li yesei bo lifnei ilus ha'ilus, when it stands before, and it's in the presence of the ilus ha'ilus, the kol nuhuroyin iloyin mischashchon kamei, where all the lights and all the revelations are darkened before it. In other words, a bright state, when it gets into an environment that's even brighter, will be darkened, will be like darkness. Like a candle can be very powerful in a dark room. But as soon as you put the candle in the light of the sun, what will it look like? It will actually be dark. You'll see the candle won't be as bright as the sun. So bottom line is, he's saying this is all nishtalshel, this is all Keser and A'K. Ukamoy, the less machshava tfisa bei klal, less machshava tfisa bei, next page, 416. This parentheses. So what does he say here? Afila machshava v'chachma da'ak. Even the thought and the wisdom of A'K, which is a very high level, A'K, right? So u'kamoisha chachma elu lamayla, like chachma that elevates upward, mina chachma, that elevates when chachma is elevating into higher than chachma, u'behelam atzmis harotzen va'ened. That's when chachma elevates into the helam atzmis, in the core concealment of will and pleasure of keser. So wisdom is a conscious understanding of something, or a conscious conception. But when it elevates into rotzen ve'aynig, which is higher than seichel, she'ein tam lerotzen klal. So when it elevates there to a place where there's no reason, it's just what he wants, it's just desire. Lo nikla sham b'shem er klal. So even though it's er chachma, all the way from the level of A'K, adam kadman, but when it goes to a place that's higher than er, that's higher than tam, than seichel, it's not called er at all. Uke'inyan turich hashecha, like the hills of the dark hills. She'ein erach chachma meir sham. That's a level that's brought to Zayar in a number of places. That's called a level where the light of wisdom does not shine there. But all this is the energy and wisdom of creation. You know, God used wisdom, we learned earlier, to design the world. There is a wisdom, the wisdom of science. The science is the understanding of what makes this world tick. So that's clearly a wisdom, but that wisdom is subject to darkness. First of all, it goes through many stages and gradations as it goes downward. And secondly, like he just says, when you take this wisdom and you expose it to a level that's higher than wisdom, it darkens. This we have an advantage in the Earth of Torah Ohr. Torah Ohr does not have this issue. Torah does not have this because Torah is coming from a place that's beyond, that is not subject to concealment in the first place. It's from Atzmis Ein Sof Shaloi Yachshich, that's not darkened. So even when it is in a place that's higher than Seichel, it doesn't get concealed. Because like we learned earlier, remember, Torah is bittul. Wisdom of science is not bittul. Wisdom of science is understanding the world and the yeshus of this world. It's all about existence. The wisdom of existence. Torah is not existence altogether. It comes from a place beyond existence. So even when Torah elevates a place that's beyond intelligence, remember, Torah also goes into Chachma. But its Chachma is a ayin dika Chachma, like we learned earlier. Ma, ayin. It's a bittul dika Chachma. Chachma that its role, like I explained, is really to experience a reality beyond ourselves. Wisdom of the world, intelligence, human intelligence, it's ultimately also meant to help us understand something beyond ourselves. But on its own, it's involved in us and in existence. And as such, is subject to the darkness that we're talking about. And when you expose it to something higher, it gets darkened. But Chachma of Torah is a different reality altogether. It's initially, its whole purpose is to express something beyond existence. So when it comes into the world of existence, it remains that way. And when we access it, we're accessing the highest levels, and that does not get darkened even when you go into a place. In other words, I would put it this way, that Amunah is ultimately beyond science. Torah is not a contradiction to Amunah, because Torah is not fundamentally an intellectual experience. It's a divine experience. It's an experience of the divine pre-tzimtzum. So Amunah is very much part, when I say Amunah, I mean L'mayla M'seichel, doesn't conceal it. When you talk about Amunah in the world of Seichel, then okay, now we're not going with Seichel, we're going with Amunah. Seichel needs Amunah, and Amunah enhances and complements. But when it comes to Torah, Torah is initially a thing is here to give us a divine experience beyond existence. That's the way I would explain what he just said here. He's saying in words that are not quite the way I just said it, but I believe that's the explanation of what he's saying here. Right? We learned this idea earlier, but now he's bringing us back to it to explain to us what Torah Ohr really is. So in other words, that word, those two words, Torah Ohr, is just, the way the Mittler Rebbe explains, is just tremendous. He took two words and gave us a whole insight into another way of experiencing God through Torah. So you're going into the world of godliness where you're experiencing God. That's what Torah is. Wisdom of existence, you're not experiencing God, you're experiencing God's wisdom and God's wisdom in creation. And there's many levels, as he just explained. Torah, you're experiencing God. God wants to give us a taste of himself and his personality and his reality. Yeah, that's my additional explanation. Okay.
Question?
Yeah, please.
I'm still trying to absorb all this, but in general, in a general level, how is this any different, or maybe is this just an elaboration on the idea that the Ohr of Torah is Atzmi? And so, I mean, if it's Atzmi, of course you're getting a revelation of godliness that is above the, let's say, diminishing light of the kav of the light of creation. It's by definition it's Atzmi. So I mean, it just seems, I don't mean to be, God forbid, he's saying the same thing over just in more words, but I'm just trying to connect this. How is what he said here any different than the notion that the Ohr of Torah is Atzmi?
First of all, even if it isn't different, it's also fine. He may be just summing up what he said before because he wants to continue the mimer and take it back to Ner Mitzvah to explain Ner Mitzvah and Torah Ohr. So that's on a very basic level. It could be there isn't. I happen to see there are some things that he's adding here, but in the fundamental principle of what we learned Ohr Atzmi before, it is more or less the same idea. There are some new details that's what I would say.
Okay.
If you want to know what the details are, I can elaborate. But I'm saying,
I do. No, I do. I'm trying to see what else he's adding.
But that's not my point. Is I don't even mind if there are no details. It's enough to say that he's summing up what he said, and then to take it to the next part of the mimer to explain why my mitzvah is only called Ner. So that's very common. He's taken back to that because he has to answer a question still that he asked about Ner Mitzvah Torah Ohr. So he's summing up what everything we've learned here is just bringing us back to it.
I see.
That's on the most basic. As far as the details, the few details that I see here that are unique, first of all, I don't think he really explained earlier the idea of Keser as being part of Chochmah of Ma'aseh Bereishis, meaning that why Keser gets darkened for the Illus Illus. I don't think that contrast he made. That's one thing he adds here, if I recall correctly. It could be, now we go back there, maybe he alluded to it, but I don't think he spelled it out quite the way we just spelled it out here. That's the main thing I see that's new. Now, you could ask, like I said a number of times, why didn't he say it earlier? But that's common in the Mittler Rebbe, that when he continues on, he often adds new points that you would think would belong earlier, but part of the development of the idea. But I have to go back and really read the page, the one that you just referred, that you helped me find, which is
407.
407, to see. I don't think he said it quite that way, but it could be it'll help understand. I remember there also we struggled through some of the lines were not so 100% clear. But that's the picture. Yeah.
So the Inyan of Keser being even though it's a very high level, but being darker, if you will, than the Ohr of Torah, is to say, like let's say in more simple terms, we think of the Torah as God's will, like one of the fundamental purposes of a Jew is just to fulfill the divine will. That's Torah. Torah is the Ratzon Hashem. But what he's saying here is that's true, but it's even more than that. It's a level that's even higher than Ratzon. I think he said Tainug. He says here, He says it's above Ratzon and Tainug, because I guess it's Atzmi, so therefore it has to be higher than even Oineg. But he's saying
you lost me now. Just
no,
you lost me. I'm not sure what you're getting at because it's not. Maybe correct, maybe not. I don't know what's missing.
Yeah.
What are you trying to add here? Well, I mean, where are you taking this from? I don't see. I mean,
I'm taking
the
it from what's
comparison
in
to
front of
Keser
us.
is clear.
Yeah.
But the answer is because Torah, this thing that you just added, that's the Ratzon Hashem, he doesn't say that here. He said that what he does say is that Torah is completely bittul. It's only about Elikus. The Ratzon Hashem is an additional point.
Keser is Ratzon, isn't it?
Well, we're not talking about Keser, we're talking about Torah.
But he says the light is higher than Keser. But Keser was the will of God. It's
but
Ratzon.
the Keser is Ratzon to create the world. Who says it's Ratzon of mitzvahs?
Well, that blows my mind. Okay.
Okay, because I'm saying I'm not. Yeah, I think you're. I'm not sure.
You're suggesting I'm conflating ideas. That's what I may be conflating. That's okay. Let me just.
Fine. I'm just saying the key thing to keep in mind here is that there's Ohr in Chochma Bereishis, and Keser is part of that, and there's a Chochma of Torah that's higher than creation existence, and that goes and there's no concealment there because it's initially all about godliness and the bittul, which is what he did say on page 407 essentially as well. He said clearly, he said that it's megala since it's bli mohuz, that's why it cannot be concealed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Look, it's complicated material. I definitely will tell you that. I think the key is to read it again and again until you get it,
Rabbi, I have something that's not related to this. Should I wait until after you stop the recording to bring it up?
If it's not related at all to what we're learning, just a separate thing altogether?
Yeah, I just was, I have an idea for a teaching that I wanted to talk to you about. And I just
Okay, so let me finish the recording now. It's 10:30.
Yeah.
Let me just so we'll stop here. It's interesting. This parentheses is very interesting. Parentheses talks about things before the parentheses. 1 second. I'll just add one more thing. Since it's most likely that Mittler Rebbe did not write this mimer, or most likely it's possible he did not write this mimer, he said it and someone else wrote it. It could be that as he was speaking, sometimes the Mittler Rebbe would sense that there's some things that need explanation of ideas that he said earlier. So you see that a few number of places I felt that was what's going on, that the Mittler Rebbe is like, since it was such a long mimer, he's adding things over things earlier. I just wanted to point that out because I see that happens quite a few times in the way the flow goes. Anyway, regardless, we'll stop at the end of the parentheses on the 5th line on page 416, and we'll continue tomorrow. Yeah, we'll stop here.
Do you think he gave this over verbally, or this was something? I mean, maybe that explains it. He's reading his audience.
He delivered a mimer. He delivered the mimer that he spoke it. The question is whether he wrote it. Most mimarim that he spoke, he also wrote. The question is whether he wrote this, and what we have here are manuscripts of those that rewrote what he wrote, or they heard it and they wrote what they heard. That's the question.
And there are some mimarim that were written and not spoken. Isn't that not correct?
Yeah, there are. But this is not in that category.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if sometimes when he repeats, he's summarizing, he's talking to his audience.
That's what I just said. That's what I just said.
And I just wanted to make sure I understood that's what you meant. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, top of page